okay if I keep that up.
Yeah, Vaz is the easiest one. And it's also the
Oh, I love
easiest one
Vaz.
because
I love Vaz. I didn't know how familiar Vaz was, you know what I'm saying? So I didn't want to make any presumptions.
Yeah.
yeah, and it also looks great when you sign it.
It sure does. I'm
So
sure. I'm sure. As someone who goes, yeah, like I love just like a 2, 3 letter situation.
mhm.
Um, so thank you for coming to our podcast today. We'd like to start off with a creative bio. So what do you have prepared? Can you take a few minutes, do your creative bio, and then tell us about how that relates to you?
Yeah, so the creative bio I thought was going to be the hard one of the between my bio and my creative bio, but it turns out that it was not. Um, it's I say so a long time ago, back when I was a kid, I went to this camp and well, for all of you who don't know, I'm a recovering pastor's kid. And so I've got um, a lot of moments in my life where people were like, trying to make impactful statements. And one of these moments was um, at a camp, at a camp, this young lady counselor thought I was a very troubled child. I wasn't. I was a knucklehead and didn't listen to anybody. But she handed me this card, and I don't know what influenced her, but let me go ahead and pull that up for y'all.
All right.
Oh, got a blast from the past. This is great.
Yeah. So the author is Robert D. Lumpton, and he's talking about relationships. And it's something that I've actually held on to. And I'm talking about this is 20 plus years that I've had this card. Um,
Wow.
so let me go ahead and read this off. Uh, the fundamental building blocks of the kingdom are relationships, not programs, systems, or productivity, but inconvenient, time consuming, intrusive relationships. The kingdom is built on personal involvements that disrupt schedules and drain energy. When I enter into redemptive relationships with others, I lose much of my capacity to produce desired results with the minimum expenditure of energy, time, money, or materials. In short, relationships sabotage my efficiency. A part of me dies. Is this perhaps what the Lord meant when he said, we must lay down our lives for each other?
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a good one, isn't it?
That
The
is.
turn that took at the end. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. Okay, okay, okay. So tell us, why did you choose this as your creative bio? What does this say about you?
Um, I love deeply,
Mm.
and I love unapologetically and very um, consistently, and I guess courageously. Um, and I have really struggled with this idea of um, how far is too much in a relationship to give,
Mhm.
right? At what point do I start protecting my energy?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, but I also know that relationships are complex,
That's right.
and they're ever evolving.
Mm.
And I feel like the people that are in my lives with a purpose, because I'm a very intentional person. And so for me, when I'm entering into relationships, I like most of my relationships to be redemptive in the way that I'm going to give in the manner that I would like to also receive. And
Mhm.
it's like very wholehearted and very kind of like, I'm putting it all on the line for you because this is not, everything is deep for me.
Yes. Yes.
You know what I mean? Like I don't like to involve myself in shallow relationships. And so, um, I
Preaching.
don't know. I think, yeah, I just, I don't see the value in not having redemptive relationships, right? Because my, you're, there's such a thing as ministry of presence.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And sometimes your presence in a relationship, even though it's a difficult relationship in itself, is redemptive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
I
that's where
love
I'm at
that
with that.
thank you for breaking it down for us. I love that this piece really challenges us to think about what is most important. Is it the frameworks, the systems, and the structures that we have this allegiance to, or is it the relationships that we can find to be in conflict sometimes with, our participation in these systems and structures? The way it's framed is like the relationships are the complicated part. They make our lives, disruptive, and
They
they are
drain us.
inconveniencing us, right?
Yeah.
But the overarching, concept here is that it's the actual opposite. It's the relationships that matter. So that was a really powerful piece.
It is. And I think we think about a lot about how capitalism requires so much of us in some ways, and it makes us like have these kinds of values of like productivity and getting things done and like doing things like for the man, right, rather than like things that invest in us. And I think the piece does a really good job of holding the kind of like tiring part about relationships, that like it requires all of this work, but like that is the only work that really matters.
That matters, right?
Yeah.
And how often do we pause and think about, I know at least for me during the pandemic, that was one of the first times I really was forced to pause and think about what was most important to me.
Yeah.
Was my relationship to my work and the work that I was doing, for my employer, was it my children? Because oftentimes, it was my work that was getting all of my time and energy and investment. That institution, which, I realized, and we all know in the back of our minds, we're, disposable, and we can be dropped at the drop of a dime. Mm-hmm. So that was the first time I really grappled with that. And so I really love this. And I think this is an amazing introduction to you, who I know is a relationship-oriented person. And speaking about depth over breadth, in your relationships, and how you prefer the deep and connected, relationships over the surface level and shallow ones, which I don't know if it's just me, but it feels like these days is seeming like less common. Like more people are more wanting to have kind of like these quick, short, surface level kind of interactions, and the depth is like scary, because it does require a certain degree of vulnerability. So yeah, I could relate to that for sure. And I appreciate you sharing that. That piece is really amazing.
Yeah. So how does your piece and like what you wanted to share about yourself in this piece relate to how like what you want to talk to us about today?
Gosh.
Was that a hard question?
Yeah, it was a hard question.
I can acknowledge that. Okay, so maybe I can take a stab at it, because I was like, I don't know if I should be the one taking a stab at this or he should be the one taking a stab at this, but let me just
go ahead.
Okay.
This one.
Okay, I'll help you out. This is a team effort after all, So I think like the things that it made me think about were about how we kind of wanted to talk about like queer spaces and inclusion in queer spaces. And also about like this kind of reminds me of like visibility, inclusivity, right? Like about how loving deeply can help us either be integrated into these spaces or like create these spaces. And so I was also kind of wondering about how does collective liberation include or require more visibility and inclusivity in spaces for trans folks, not just in society at large, but like also in queer spaces.
Yeah. I would add on to that too, I don't want to.
No, Ina.
Like I haven't talked, now it's gone. No, but I think when we talk about, depth over breadth, for example, and deep relationships and meaningful relationships over the surface level, it does make me think about like safe spaces and how we can oftentimes throw that label on a space and say like, this is a safe space. And how that can be so surface level, that can be so shallow more often than not, because how do we know if it's a safe space? Like, for whom? Who gets to decide, that this is an inclusive space? Are we seeking that feedback? Are we allowing people to share, their experiences? Are we just assuming that because that is our intention, that the impact matches?
Yeah.
These are all very valid points.
I feel like this is like a bouquet or like a charcuterie board situation in which you can just like pick one to start with,
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I do believe that there's an element of building culture that has to rely on these ideas of redemptive relationships, but also like um, I was thinking about this earlier, like visibility versus not visibility, right? Like, how do we create safe spaces? And the reality is that we can't create safe spaces. There's no guarantee for safe spaces, right? So
That's
how do
right.
we create more equitable spaces? How do we create more diverse spaces where people are seen? And I think it starts with this idea of having more depth in your everyday relationships to try and build those kind of cultures, right? Because when you do it, you allow somebody else to do it.
It's like when you do
You
your
know?
work, everybody else can do theirs.
That's right.
Yeah, because like when I find that when I transitioned um in my late 30s, well, not my late 30s, my mid 30s. And so I had a whole life before I transitioned. And what I found was that um, the more that I passed as a cisgendered man, the more that I was able to kind of infiltrate this idea of masculinity and redefine what it was.
Undercover.
Undercover, exactly. But part of this was the intimacy that comes from a fundamental like relationship with somebody, a redemptive relationship with somebody, right? Because I was able to be vulnerable with people, I was able to attract people who were interested in being more vulnerable.
Yes.
Yeah. Can
And
you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
and then specifically as being viewed as a cisgendered male, right? And so I'm able to make connections with cisgendered males because of the way I appear, who are interested in kind of creating those spaces.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
So
very
it's like
interesting place to be in, by the way.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. What you're speaking to is it's the analogy that comes to mind for me is like when you take up space, it's like you widen the net for other people, and then you show yourself so that you're able to then let other people know it's okay, to do the same. And then you're also attracting those individuals who are able to see in you the thing that they themselves are aiming to embody. So
Yeah. I feel like, can we slow down for just a minute and can you talk us through what a redemptive relationship is and what it looks like?
Yeah, I mean, if we're taking it off of, the simple like idea of I am not here just for the good times, I'm here for the bad as well.
yes.
Right. And I'm here to, and I'm not here for the what's in it for me. I'm here for the how can we grow together? You know what I mean? So like I have a friend who who I said this to the other day. I was like, I'm fully invested. The difference between me and your other friend is I'm fully invested in you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, come through with the earrings, come through with the outfit, come through with the raise, come through with you know what I mean? From the smallest thing to the biggest, most thing. Like I celebrate that person,
Yeah.
And that's what I think is like you're fully involved in that relationship, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like it's reminding me of like, you know, a holistic like kind of love, right? Where it's like I'm
Yes.
here for like you as a human and not just
Yeah.
what you give me or what you do for me, right? Like it's like all of the things. And I think that's so like beautiful how you call it, like how it's like redemptive in that way,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like and also it's about bearing witness. You know, I went to this wedding yesterday, and so like my what was interesting about it was that even though a lot of the folks who were there were like religious or formally religious, right? The focus of the sermon was about bearing witness, right? And about like the two people getting married bearing witness, and then like the community bearing witness to the things. And this like
Mm-hmm.
redemptive love seems like about like loving this person in their whole entirety, and also bearing witness to both the good and the bad and the ugly.
So my question for you all is how much of that, because I think a relationship like that, that's redemptive, like a key component of that relationship has to be the willingness to grow,
Yeah.
to lean into growth, which we know can be uncomfortable and um, involves change and being okay with that, which we know is hard for a lot of folks. So curious what you all think about like how much of that and creating a redemptive relationship or making space for it in your life is contingent upon you being able to do that with yourself.
Ooh.
Hmm. Say that again.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, do you think that you have the capacity to be in relationship with someone else and have that kind of or quality of relationship if you're not willing to start with yourself, right? And lean into growth and discomfort and change?
There's no way.
No.
Ain't no
Hell no.
way. It
Hell
starts
no.
with the, yeah, it starts with the home,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
And I
Yeah.
think it's like, and I think also, like something I've been trying to lean into with my friends is like call me in, right? Like
Yes.
if I do something crazy, like call me in.
Yeah, that's a
um,
part of it. That
it's a
has to
part
be
of
a
it,
part of it. Yeah.
and I also feel like you have to be able to do that for yourself
Mm-hmm.
before you can allow other people to do that for you,
Yeah.
right? Because like if other people are like trying to call you in and you're like, how dare you speak against me in this way,
Right.
then like there's no way like that relationship can't witness the bad or the ugly, right? Because there just isn't safety
Mm.
enough to do so. And I think like also this idea of safety is so interesting because like true safety isn't a thing, but trust is a thing,
Oh,
Mm.
yeah.
right? And that like even though we can't truly create a safe space, we can trust each other to like if something becomes unsafe, we can come back together and like
Mm-hmm.
stitch it up.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I've got something good on this.
Yeah.
We want to hear it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a LinkedIn gem, you know. And so let me add it to this little group chat here so you can see what's going on here. So you can take a look at the diamond shape, and it says, you know, in order for psychological safety is the foundation of everything, right? And it allows for
Ooh.
inclusion. Inclusion a lot creates diversity, and diversity facilitates performance, right? And it's this idea that creating psychological safety really should be your number one priority and your basis for everything, and everything else, performance and all of that stuff that we've been trained is what we should be focusing on, will follow.
Yeah.
Right. When at
Which,
the core of this, we are human first. And if we
yeah,
don't feel safe, right? If we're
we
not a part of the, we're not included, if our perspective is not valued, how can we perform optimally?
right. And I think like the best thing about that is that it's like across the board, right? Like it
Yeah.
goes for work, it goes for like intimate relationships, it goes for friendships, it goes for like community, right? Like if we can't have the psychological safety, we can't perform, we can't even begin to perform, right? And I think like also the fact that inclusion is the next step up from psychological safety is also super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I have anything else to follow that with, but like, but like, I'm like, oh, this like how this is stacking is so good,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting because that's right on my desktop too. Because I was like, man, this I worked for some of the largest, corporations. I worked for Apple for 12 years. And I think that the thing that they got wrong was psychological safety, because
Yeah.
they were so focused on this idea of branding and branding and performance,
Mm-hmm.
um, that there wasn't any kind of, especially for the neurodivergent, which was really difficult because they hire a lot of neurodivergent people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because a lot of us are brilliant.
Right.
Yeah, and creatives,
Yeah.
right? And so like they would hire a lot of creatives and a lot of neurodivergent people, but then expect them to be neurotypical
Or
and to
function
respond,
neurotypically. Yeah.
yes, respond
I mean,
neurotypically, you know, then you burn them out.
it's the
Yeah.
biggest farce. It's the biggest farce to say that
Uh-huh.
you want more neurodivergent individuals in your spaces that are fully neurotypically designed.
Which is like counterintuitive. I also feel like this happened with the university I work at, which is hilarious because they brought in like I think it's around like 2016, 2017-ish, where there was like a really big push for like diversity and inclusion where they pushed in and like brought in and like expanded the net and brought in a whole bunch of Black and brown students, which is great, but had no safety net for them, right? And then also the
Yes.
campus as it stands is like ridiculously homogenous and also like racially hostile, right? And
Yeah.
so like ignoring the complete bottom of psychological safety and skipping right to diversity and then going
Yeah.
to inclusion and then trying to like think about performance, right? When performance is absolutely off the table.
Right. And so this ties right back in fully to our conversation about like visibility, which we know is
Yeah.
simply not enough. You can't
Yeah.
just have, right? You can't just invite individuals to be in spaces. How are you amplifying their experiences? How are you amplifying their voices? So, when we think about collective liberation, we know that that is like the next step, right? Towards that. And in queer spaces, even like we know that they're supposed to be designed for individuals who identify as queer, yet there are still lots of folks being left out
Yeah.
spaces. And so Vasquez, if you could speak to us a little bit about that, like how does trans visibility in queer spaces still require us to be vigilant towards affirmation and amplification of voices that
Yeah.
are left out.
Can I add something real quick? Which is like the idea that how do we go past also like how do we go past saying it's inclusive to actually making it inclusive?
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's a tough one. It's a tough one really because there's two
Yeah.
sides to, I mean, there's multiple sides to this coin. This coin is not a flat.
It's a dice.
Right. It's
It's a
not even a coin.
dice. Yeah, it's not even a coin. It's a Dungeons and Dragons dice.
Like a
It
20-sided
is.
dice. Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah. And so because really you want to be able to have you, depending on who you ask, there's members of the trans community who would like to be stuff and not acknowledged as trans.
Right.
Just kind of like that's not their main identity. It just happens that they are trans,
Exactly.
and they just want to live out their lives. So visibility to them is neither, it's either not important or it also can be dangerous
That's right.
to be visible.
It's like
Um,
visibility is passing.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so um but there's also that other piece of it where people want to be acknowledged and not be left out. And so because of that, because we are so in my mind, we are so far behind when it comes to understanding gender and trans issues and
Yeah.
even sexual identity. We've been working on this one for a
Yeah.
long time, y'all.
Yeah.
We haven't
You know
gotten
what
that
I
close.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we haven't even gotten to the singular topics, much less the intersections of those topics. And so
Damn.
we almost have to start with visibility so people understand that we do exist.
Right. Just existing in and of itself is like still a, for some
and that
people.
And that like a lot of folks kind of go through life not recognizing that there are these folks all around them, regardless of whether or not they have noticed, or regardless of whether or not those folks have trusted them enough to be able to like share that, or like be able to be seen fully.
Yeah, it's interesting for me because like I am a person who feels that because I have the privilege of having somewhat of a safe environment to exist in my transness, that I have to be visible for those who can't be visible, right? Or create spaces. I heard someone, I think on the interwebs the other day, say that if you're a trans creator, you're healing someone.
Oof.
Oh yeah.
Because really that visibility, like even though there's people that are like have had enough of transness, there are people that have yet to know a person of trans experience.
That's right.
Like I'm a lot of people's first. You know what I mean? And I'd like to be in a world where that's not where the first isn't a thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Or it's not something that we have to think about because we've already created spaces that are psychologically safe where people can just exist. But it's a really hard concept for people because it's not really tangible for them as it is when it comes to what they think of race matters or something like that.
Yeah.
Like having spaces like, you clearly belong in this space. Like visually, I can see visually that the space is diverse.
Right.
But that's not necessarily always true when it comes to non-binary or people of trans experience, right?
I think this is something that I think a lot about. Like I identify as like non-binary and gender fluid, and like the fact that like aesthetics, and like not even aesthetics how you see your own aesthetics, but how other people are reading your aesthetics is like what matters, right? Is very frustrating because I think that there's this idea that folks expect non-binary folks to present androgynously, and that's not always the case, right? Some non-binary folks are like more on one side or the other. Sometimes they switch over. Sometimes their non-binary experience feels like a trans experience, and there are other non-binary folks who like don't feel like they have a trans experience. I'm super curious about that because that was not my experience, but like it's like still a thing that happens. And so there is this idea or like this force of like aesthetics, like about how other like the other views you, right? As a way of like justifying what pot you need to be in, when that seems really counterintuitive to literally everything.
That's right.
Yeah. I heard a comedian talk about like this generation that's out now. Like this generation doesn't want to be identified in any way. They just want to be floating amoebas through through space.
like honestly, yeah.
Yes. And I was like, oh, so you get it.
You get it, finally. You thought
the way it should have always been.
Yes,
Duh.
you thought you were reading, huh? Yeah, and it's like, what would it be? And I think so that's the other thing about this chart that I think is super interesting is the difference, because I think we talk about inclusion and diversity as like one thing, right? But this chart breaks it up, right? Where like inclusivity comes first and diversity comes second. So I guess like a question for the group is, what is the difference between these two things? And what does it look like for a space to be inclusive and not diverse, or diverse but not inclusive? I think the second one is like easier to imagine because I feel like I've been in spaces that are diverse but not inclusive.
Diverse but not inclusive. Yeah.
I think my first, go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's all you.
Yeah, boo. It's all you, boo.
I have no idea what I'm saying. I was getting ready to just say the first thing that comes to mind for me is I feel like diversity is harder than inclusion. And my thought around that is that inclusion feels like it could be a little bit more geared toward the aesthetic aspect of things that you were just referencing, where it's like, well, we know we have individuals who represent this identity marker, that identity marker, but now the hard part is like, what do they have to say? And that's where I think the diversity comes in, because even when you have individuals who represent a certain group, for example, as someone who identifies as a Black woman in, spaces that are supposed to be built for Black women, I've noticed that even sharing my own, experience, even if it's different than the majority of what the group is sharing, it's not always welcome. And it's almost like, outcasted or pushed aside. And so like diversity is a lot harder than people want to acknowledge that it is. It really requires you to be okay with the perspective that's not your own. It requires curiosity. Make space. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. I don't know that I can say, I would have to really think about like what the difference is, like how I would really sum that up. But I just know that diversity seems a little bit more challenging for us to embrace.
My name's Ina. I don't know what I'm saying. Drops a whole truth bomb.
I don't know if that made any sense.
No, it made all the sense. Yeah, okay. Yeah. And I feel like you started to piece apart the difference, right? Like diversity is potentially about like curiosity and acceptance.
Yeah.
Right? Versus inclusion is like you're there. Mm-hmm. Right? And then diversity is like it's okay that you're here.
Yeah.
And we're gonna listen to you because you're here.
Right. It's the listening part. It's like you can't just be here. Now, what do you have to share? And how can that shape, what we're doing? Which
Yeah. And I guess and I think for me, when I was thinking like I've been in diverse spaces that are not inclusive, I think maybe I had a different understanding where like there was a lot of different people in the room, but in the same kind of way, if you had a differing perspective, you were ousted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's real quiet. It's not always embracing of the different, the other.
Yeah.
No, I think y'all hit the nail on the head when you're talking about like inclusion is like is the open arms, and kind of like the diversity is kind of the hug. Like that's
that's good.
There is I would say Chicago's diverse, but it's not always inclusive.
Totes. Totes.
You know what I mean? So like and this goes back to kind of ties back kind of this idea of like, where have all the trans people gone in nightlife? Like technically we're diverse, but we're not really inclusive, because what we did was we took a lesbian night and we just turned the word lesbian into queer, and then we expected everybody to feel okay with it.
Yeah.
But the spaces are still very much lesbian spaces.
Right. Or like I feel like there's a similar thing about like clubs in Boys Town that are like and I will say, as like someone who presents femme, I have gotten somewhat accosted in these places because like there's this idea like, oh, it's gay, therefore it's queer, therefore it's safe for you to exist here. But there's a whole lot of non-consensual touching that is not cute, right?
That's a problem.
And it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. But like the idea is like, you're queer, I'm queer, it's totally fine if I, right? Which like, so wow. I think, right. And so I think that's also a part of this, is that there's like, we can't slap queer onto something that's for a particular group, right? And like, I think it's good that groups have their places and their haunts, right? But I also think that it's like, okay, if we're going to have a queer neighborhood that's like a queer neighborhood, then it can't just be like gay dudes represented. We have to have our gender non-conforming folks represented. We also need to have like a lesbian space that's for the lesbians, and like a truly like gender non-conforming trans space, right? Because I also feel like as a non-binary person, and as a non-binary person who was born female, I don't get to like there's a word that I'm frolic. I don't get to frolic with like my AMAB non-binary brethren, right?
Yeah.
And there's not a space for like non-binary folks across the spectrum to like come and exist together. And then I think similarly for trans folks, right? And I think that's also a problem.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that we're going to start a night. This is what I'm hearing. Is that you just committed to starting a night.
That's just for non-binary folks and trans folks, trans and non-binary. Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't have anything to do with crocheting or reading books, because there's a lot of those happening right now.
There. Okay, and here's my other thing is that like I am a crocheter and I'm a knitter
Yeah.
and a book
Yep.
reader. So it's like
Right.
love those, but like also where's the places where we can get a little saucy.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a lot about that.
This makes me think about that Maya quote, that where she says, "You're only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place, no place at all. The price is high, the reward is great." Because it's like when you think about belonging and being in a space where you feel that like this is the space for me. I finally, found myself in a place. And I think in some way, all of us, no matter what our identity markers are, like want that, but never quite find that. It's like, is there ever really a place that we can belong? With it being such a basic human need that we all have, it really requires us to kind of like let go in some ways of this idea of finding this one place for us where we can actually ever fully belong, and just accept that like even though there isn't that, we still do belong, wherever we are, because we have our unique experiences that the world needs to like learn from, and we need to make space for ourselves so that we can also make space for others. So with that said, Vasquez, can you share some of your experience with us in learning how to let go of the perceptions of others and, not defining yourself by these limiting narratives that sometimes, may have been put up on you?
Yeah, there's just so many examples of that. I'm gonna be wrong. Whether it's like transitioning from, from not passing to passing, and then having to learn guy code, and having to learn that people expect certain things from you because you look a certain way.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with, being Puerto Rican, or, it has you know what I mean? And so, and it's across the board, it's across races, right? Because all men have this kind of like, all cis men, should I say, have been socialized in kind of a similar fashion.
Right.
Right. And so then there's these codes that you have to learn.
I would like a story about this and or an example of the guy code that like that you've experienced and that you've like had to detangle.
Yeah, and part of it is also like their perception of your sexuality according to how you present as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like
aesthetics.
Yeah, and so complimenting men is a weird one for men.
Oh yeah.
Because like I'm so used to just complimenting people. Like it's very free flowing, and so a guy came in and he had gorgeous locks. Oh, they were just done fresh. He was fresh. You know what I mean? And I told him that, and he was just like, like you're not supposed to do that kind of whatever. And I'm like, ooh, someone has intimacy issues, and it shows.
Woo!
You know what I mean? Like, or like,
yeah.
men taking up space. I've been shoulder checked quite a few times since
Mm.
passing.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Because I
So
don't know why.
physically taking up space. Like, wow.
And it's like also it's like I feel like usually we talk about taking up space as a good thing, but in this case it's like
Not.
a bad thing because they're taking up all of the space, like
Um,
man spreading, when sometimes dudes sit on the train and then they spread their legs to the
right.
absolute
Oh my God.
limit. Right. And it's like, you know
Yeah,
that there are other people here, you know
Mhm.
that nobody wants to be staring at your junk all the time. Like,
Like, what is happening right
what
now?
is happening? Yeah. I feel like I started doing this thing a few years ago where if I'm walking on the sidewalk and a bunch of dudes are walking towards me, I don't move. And so it's been super interesting because I find that white men in particular don't even see me until I run into them or they run into me. And then they're like, and I'm like,
Wow.
right.
yeah,
That
yeah.
is very
There's
interesting.
although I've never, you know what? No, I've only been shoulder checked by a white man once, and that was prior to transitioning in Boys Town. It was clearly a homophobia sort of situation happening
Mm.
there. Um, but outside of that, it's always been men of color who have
Mm,
shoulder checked me for space.
interesting.
Mm.
What do you
And
make of it?
I don't know. And I don't know if it's because they perceive me as white or
Mm,
it's just a general chip on their shoulder. Like it's very hard. Obviously, it's they're not emotionally regulating, so it's not exactly like
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
not gonna be exactly transparent with their feelings.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but and it's always been and they've always gone out of their way to do it. You know what I mean? So it's never been a
oh,
case where we're like shoulder to shoulder and they do it. It's almost like they took a sidestep and then shoulder checked me. Um,
It's very
yeah.
interesting. What is that
aggressive.
about? Yeah. Like,
Mhm.
I
And
can't.
I
not even turned around, just kept walking too.
I would love if there was a podcaster who was listening to this right now, if you could weigh in on this.
Seriously.
Like I gotta know. I gotta know why.
Seriously.
For what
Cis
reason?
guy. And it's not like, and these are, and they can make a whole bunch of, this is prior to neck tattoos. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? This
Hmm.
is prior to, I guess, the fuller facial hair. Um, a little bit smaller. Maybe I felt like maybe I was chugging the water or something. Like, I don't know. It's just, I don't know. There's, and it is interesting to have that. Also, the way that men speak on women,
Yeah.
it is disgusting.
Yeah.
Number one, but having to learn not to fall into that.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
you know what I mean? Because I'm pretty vocal about, people saying ridiculous things, but there's sometimes when you're just tired and you just don't want to say anything, and you're just like, I just can't. I don't have the. You're an
Yeah.
ignorant person. I just don't have the time for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seriously. I can
Uh,
imagine that that would be like exhausting after some time because it's
yeah.
literally, in the culture and like you said, bro code. And so having to advocate nonstop for, you know, um, the respect and the value of women to be upheld.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I also kind of wonder if, because like you mentioned, men are socialized in a particular way, and then like how it's like sometimes complimenting men is weird. I think likewise, like intimacy between men is weird,
Mhm.
right? Like even like physical intimacy, emotional intimacy, like kind of all of that, right? Like dudes don't get to hug each other, which is a huge problem. And I kind of wonder how much of that is like mixed in with like homophobia and like misogyny, right? Where like men compliment women to get something, or like right versus like if they compliment each other, that's signaling something when it's not.
Yeah. And so much of that is just like cultural and like American too. Cause I
Oh
know
yeah.
when I was, yeah, in the Middle East, I they had a very different cultural standard and everything they did. But you know, just like walking through the malls, you would regularly see men just holding hands. And one of the ways that they greeted each other was rubbing noses. And so you would often see that, you know, between men. And being there
Sorry.
in teaching and being in like these teacher chats, it was always like lit up with people like, did you see them? You know, all of the nose rubbing. And it was just like, for us as Americans, people just were not okay with that. Like they just didn't and couldn't wrap their minds around that. And so it taught me just like how, you know, it really showed me just like how disconnected we are from like, you know, what true intimacy is and can look like between, you know, men in our culture, and how much we lose.
Yeah.
You know, from just upholding this foolishness of like, you can't touch, like that makes, you know, I mean, like it's what
no
is
homo, which is like
no homo. Yeah.
No
sorry.
Diddy.
Oh my God, the way that has turned around,
it's so crazy.
It's crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy. I don't know, you know, we're gonna have to have a whole like pop culture. We have to talk about pop culture and like collective liberation, because everything that's going on with bb_drizzy just don't even get me started, because okay bb_drizzy is running rent free in my head, but like everything that's going on, the internet is just shitting on Drake.
Oh, that's Drake, right?
Yeah, which is like, don't get me wrong, totally warranted, but I'm interested in how that's happening, how like no homo is turning into no Diddy, right? And no Diddy as a baseline ignores the violence that he's done to Black women, right? We had that video come out recently with Cassie, where he was, right?
Full blown
beat the shit out of her, like in an elevator lobby, right? But people want to talk about the fact that he's on the DL.
Right. Yeah. Which in my opinion is like, I was like, where's the crime? Like, I'm still not sure what he did wrong, if that was the case. But with the Cassie, let's bring it back to like what the actual problem is here, which nobody seems to be talking about.
And I do think that there's a connection between like being on the DL and like have spewing violence in some ways, because like folks, Vaz, do you want to take this? I think you should take this.
Well, no, I no, I knew exactly where you were going with this, but yeah, there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of self-hating rappers, much like there's a lot of self-hating senators out there, and people in politics, and you can tell by the ferocity that they use against the queer community, right? The ferocity, like it's very personal to them.
Yeah.
What I do with my bedroom is personal to you, boo-boo.
Make it make sense.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yeah. And like in that way, I think the violence that Diddy spewed out to others is connected to this like self-hatred that he has. But I also feel like we need to talk about these things as like two separate things. Right. And I also think like, you know, Diddy, like desire is fine. I just, there's that. And like, that's
important, because like, I wouldn't have made that connection. Like I wouldn't have known that was connected in any way to maybe how he was like becoming increasingly, you know, violent, which we don't know all of the circumstances around it, but we've seen enough. We know enough to know that he got some stuff going on.
There's been shit swirling about him for decades, right?
For a really long time. That's true.
Yeah. And I think like there's also like, I think a connection between queer men who want to experience their own femininity, and then they take that out, or like their desire to want to enact their own femininity out in violence on women for being able to be the thing that they can't be, or be the thing that they don't want to be.
Wow.
And I think you see the same kind of violence for men who attack other gay men, right? For like, they get to be the thing that they can't be, or they like don't get the chance to be. And so they're like taking that out. Right. And I think like Diddy, I think, is participating in some of these things, but I think people, because people hate gay people, right? They want to focus on that, or like for Black men in particular, there's so much shame around being gay. when there's nothing shameful about it. Right. We got sidetracked with Diddy, but like but I think we're still like we're still talking about like yeah.
It's all
Sorry.
connected.
Yeah, it is,
It's
but
all
don't get me
connected.
started on Diddy.
Because if you want to talk about toxic masculinity, we can talk about
Yeah.
we can talk
Yeah.
about that, or we can talk about masculinity in general and the way that this is a really major, like this isn't just like a got into an argument with your, this is years and years of pattern abuse,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Being played out, and why is it that it's just now coming out? You know, what
Yeah.
is it? Is it the, you know, is it the money? Is it the money in the male
Did he
status?
piss
Is
off
it the,
somebody? Yeah.
you know
That,
what I mean?
yes, because why
Um,
exactly? And those are the questions you have to ask, which is so messed up.
Yeah.
Because like we shouldn't have to be asking those kinds of questions, like who did he piss off this time?
That
Otherwise, we know it would still be under wraps, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Which just lets you know how many people have been complicit for as long as they have been in
Right.
his bad behavior. Yeah. And
Yeah.
also probably participated in some ways that we still haven't figured out.
See, and this is the other thing. This is the other thing. Cause like I think when R. Kelly, like when like the thing with R. Kelly finally started, like the cat was out of the bag, right?
Yeah.
Even in Surviving R. Kelly, you had his tour manager, you had like other people who were like
Yeah.
on his
All these
side,
people.
like who
Yeah.
absolutely covered his ass.
Yeah. Knew what was happening.
Knew what was happening, were complicit in it, like helped him out.
Yep. Yep.
And so I think this like relates obviously heavily back to the bro code, right? In which like it seems like masculinity is so ill-defined but but it is the thing above all else. Like whatever we're gonna like imagine is like masculinity, we have to hold this above the safety and well-being of literally everybody else in our community, children included.
And and I think there's also the fact that these things get complicated by power imbalances, too. And I don't want to not acknowledge that, because I do think like when it's the hand that feeds you, people are more likely to, not that it makes excuses for, their behavior, but there's always that element of power that exists in these situations that influences people's behavior, even when it comes to how power can corrupt individuals to do, things that that are heinous.
Yeah, and there was a lot of silence amongst the people that in his community, which made them complicit.
That's right.
And I think the silence portion is how people treat things that they don't want to deal with.
That's right. Yes.
You know what I mean? And it's like, well, that doesn't make you less complicit. You were there, right? You saw the girl, you heard the scream, yes, he could ruin your career, but that's also somebody's life.
Yeah. That's somebody's baby. like what? Yeah.
And just shout out to Cassie for having the courage to speak out, because I can see that this is a whole web of lies and like deceit and like cover-ups and so much stuff like that people knew about. She had to really struggle, to have the courage to do this and to question whether she would even be believed. And let's be honest, so many people still didn't believe it until we just saw this footage.
Which is also like, somebody brought this up on the internet, right? But like, I think it's like a very good first question to go to, which is like, why the fuck do we need to see somebody actively getting their shit beaten? Like, why would we need somebody getting like the shit beaten out of them rather on video in order to believe that a dude with power beat up somebody with less power?
That is the actual standard. And it's really sick and sad, because it's not just as it relates to this kind of violence. It's like at this point, that is the standard across the board. I was asking that question when it came to George Floyd. Like, why did it take that for the world to go up and, you know what I mean? Like,
I believe that police brutality is a thing, even though we've been screaming about it since the beginning.
This is the new standard. Like, this is really like
it's
beyond
dangerous.
It's beyond.
But it's also this is not new. We had Rihanna,
right? Yes.
You know what I mean? If we want to talk police brutality, we can talk LA riots. We can talk, we can go way, we have it on film. We have it on whatever.
Always.
There's been and I think that's the other thing, right? It's like when you see juries who there's a video